The mystery of the soul sits at the crossroads of science, philosophy, and spirituality. Across history, people have used the word soul to name something essential about who we are, an inner core that feels like the true self, carries our identity over time, and, in many traditions, survives bodily death. Yet as neuroscience maps the brain in increasing detail, it becomes harder to say where, exactly, a soul would fit. At the same time, even the most advanced brain science still cannot fully explain why there is an inner life at all. That tension, between the brain's obvious importance and the stubborn mystery of consciousness, is where the modern conversation about the soul truly lives. Different cultures and religions have offered very different answers to what the soul is. In many Western traditions, the soul is an immaterial, immortal essence created by God, capable of existing apart from the body and facing moral judgment after death. Ancient Greek philosophers already disagreed on this point. Plato saw the soul as an immaterial, rational self that can pre-exist and outlive the body, even being reborn in new forms. Aristotle, by contrast, called the soul the form of a living being, more like a principle of organization than a ghostly thing inside us. In India, Hindu philosophy speaks of Atman, an eternal soul or self that in some schools is ultimately identical with Brahman, the divine ground of reality. Buddhism famously goes the opposite direction, denying any permanent soul and teaching anatta, or non-self. What we call a person is a constantly changing flow of physical and mental processes without an unchanging core. Already here we see a crucial divide. Some traditions insist the soul is a real, enduring entity that transcends physical life. Others say the sense of a solid self is an illusion we cling to, and that liberation comes from seeing through it. Modern science did not invent the soul debate, but it reshaped it in a powerful way. In the 17th century, René Descartes argued that mind and body are two different kinds of substance. Mind, or soul, is thinking, non-physical, and indivisible. Body is extended in space and obeys physical laws. This view, called Cartesian dualism, helped sharpen the classic mind-body problem. If mind and matter are so different, how do they interact? How can a non-physical intention make a physical arm move? Critics later mocked this as the idea of a ghost in the machine, suggesting that instead of explaining the mind, it simply introduces a mysterious entity that does not fit the rest of our scientific picture. As neuroscience advanced, more and more aspects of mind, perception, memory, emotion, decision-making, were traced to brain processes. The conversation slowly shifted from "what is the soul?" to "how does the brain create consciousness and the sense of self?" Yet the older language of soul never entirely vanished, because many people still feel that the brain-based story is incomplete. Some of the strongest pressure on traditional ideas of the soul comes from cases where brain damage radically changes who a person seems to be. The famous example of Phineas Gage, a 19th century railway worker, illustrates this starkly. An explosion drove an iron rod through his skull and frontal lobes. He survived physically, but his personality was reported to have changed so dramatically that friends said he was no longer the same man. Today, neurologists see similar patterns all the time. Damage to frontal areas can alter moral judgment, impulse control, and social behavior. Degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's slowly corrode memory and the story we tell about ourselves. Strokes and tumors can flip emotional tone, religious commitment, or risk-taking behavior. Traits that many cultures once understood as properties of the soul, character, memory, moral sense, turn out to be highly sensitive to the condition of specific brain networks. This does not settle the question of whether a soul exists, but it does show that the I we experience is deeply entwined with neural tissue. Modern brain imaging strengthens this impression. Technologies such as fMRI and EEG allow scientists to observe patterns of neural activity, while people see images, recall memories, feel pain, or rest with their eyes closed. Distinct signatures appear when a stimulus is consciously perceived compared to when it is processed unconsciously. Global patterns change across different states, waking, dreaming, anesthesia, coma. In clinical practice, these measures help distinguish whether someone is likely conscious even if they cannot move or speak. Taken together, this work supports a simple but powerful claim. In normal circumstances, when brain function stops, detectable consciousness stops. The more we learn about the brain, the less room there seems to be for an independent, non-physical pilot controlling the body from outside. Another blow to a simple picture of a freely willing soul comes from experiments on decision-making. Benjamin Libet and later researchers studied the timing of brain activity related to voluntary actions. They found that a slow buildup of neural activity, the so-called readiness potential, begins before a person becomes aware of deciding to move. In some modern studies, brain scanners can predict which button someone will press seconds before the person reports making a choice. One interpretation is that unconscious brain processes initiate actions, and conscious awareness plays catch-up, creating a narrative of "I decided," after the neural machinery already made its move. If that view is right, the will might emerge from complex brain dynamics rather than from an autonomous soul directing the body like a puppeteer. Not everyone agrees on this conclusion, especially since these experiments use very simple, artificial choices. Still, they force us to rethink how we imagine free will and agency. Despite all this progress, a core puzzle remains untouched. Even if we can map every relevant brain circuit for seeing, remembering, or deciding, we still do not know why any of this should be accompanied by subjective experience. This is what David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. Science can explain the easy problems, how the brain recognizes patterns, integrates sensory information, and produces behavior. The hard problem asks why there is an inner movie at all, why brain processes are experienced from the inside as colors, sounds, thoughts, and emotions instead of unfolding in the dark. We can imagine a universe where brains process information, but no one is home to feel anything. The fact that we do feel something raises a stubborn question that current theories do not fully answer. This hard problem is one reason some philosophers and scientists keep an open mind about deeper layers of reality. A few argue that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, as basic as space, time, or mass, rather than an emergent byproduct of complex computation. Ideas like panpsychism suggest that mind-like aspects are present in primitive form throughout matter, and that human consciousness is a highly organized expression of something that was always there. Others think this goes too far, and that we simply have not yet found the right way to describe brain processes. But even those who resist talk of souls often admit that the gap between physical description and lived experience is not yet closed. In this sense, the old mystery of the soul has been reframed rather than solved. It is no longer just about immortality, but about why there is someone having a life at all. Because the hard problem feels so resistant, some people turn to quantum physics for help. Quantum theory, with its superpositions, uncertainty, and strange entanglements, seems mysterious enough to match the enigma of consciousness. This has led to proposals such as the OR theory, which claims that quantum computations in microscopic structures inside neurons generate conscious moments when they collapse. Supporters of such theories hope that the weirdness of quantum behavior can explain the weirdness of subjective experience and perhaps protect a place for free will or a non-material aspect of mind. However, most physicists and neuroscientists remain skeptical. Quantum states are fragile and usually decohere almost instantly in warm, wet environments like the brain. Empirical support for sustained quantum coherence in neuronal microtubules is weak and contested. And even if quantum events do occur in the brain, that does not by itself explain why they should be experienced as anything. Beyond these technical debates, popular books and talks sometimes use phrases like quantum soul or quantum healing in ways that borrow the aura of physics without respecting its limits. At present, quantum mechanics does not provide a scientifically grounded proof of a soul. It mostly serves as metaphor and inspiration. If a soul exists, we might expect clues to appear near the boundary of life and death. This is why near-death experiences and reincarnation research attract so much attention. Near-death experiences often include strikingly similar elements: a sense of leaving the body, traveling through a tunnel toward a bright light, encountering deceased relatives or transcendent beings, reviewing one's life, and feeling profound peace. Many survivors say these experiences were more real than ordinary waking life and often come back with changed values. Neuroscience offers several partial explanations. Reduced oxygen to the eyes and visual system can produce tunnel-like visual effects. Disturbance of brain regions that track the body's position in space can generate out-of-body sensations. Surges of activity in emotional and memory centers might account for intense feelings and vivid imagery at the threshold of death. A few reported cases include seemingly accurate perceptions of events that would have been hard to see from the patient's physical position, and these remain controversial. Overall, though, controlled studies have not yet produced widely accepted proof that consciousness separates from the brain and observes from outside. Believers and skeptics interpret the same data very differently, and the question remains open. Reincarnation research takes the soul question in a different direction. Over several decades, investigators have compiled thousands of cases in which young children, often between ages 2 and 6, spontaneously talk about another life. Some mention names, places, professions, and manners of death that appear to match real, deceased individuals the family never consciously knew. In some of the most striking cases, children have birthmarks in locations corresponding to wounds or scars described in medical reports of the deceased person. For those inclined toward spiritual explanations, this looks like evidence that a soul or consciousness stream migrates from body to body. Skeptical scholars, however, point out that many of these cases occur in cultures where belief in reincarnation is already strong, which can influence both the children and the adults collecting the stories. They also note that children can acquire information indirectly and later repeat it without remembering the source, a phenomenon known as cryptomnesia. Matching a child's vague statements to a specific deceased person's life can also involve a lot of selective attention. These cases are intriguing and difficult to dismiss outright, but they fall short of the kind of rigorous, repeatable evidence that would persuade mainstream science to accept reincarnation as proven fact. While these contested frontier topics keep the soul debate lively, some of the most productive overlap between science and spirituality happens in the study of meditation, prayer, and mystical experience. Neurotheology uses brain imaging to look at what happens during deep spiritual states. Scans of monks in meditation and nuns in contemplative prayer show reduced activity in regions that normally help us distinguish where the body ends and the world begins. At the same time, there are changes in areas linked to attention, emotion, and intention. Subjectively, people report losing their sense of a separate self, feeling united with everything, or encountering a divine presence. From inside, this can feel like direct contact with the soul or the sacred. From outside, it looks like a specific brain state that can be trained and reproduced. Research on long-term meditators reveals that such practices can lead to lasting changes in brain structure and function. The default mode network, which supports daydreaming and self-referential thinking, often becomes less dominant. People report less rumination and a more spacious, present-centered awareness. Clinical studies using psychedelics like psilocybin in controlled settings show something similar in a more dramatic way. These substances can temporarily disrupt the default mode network and produce powerful experiences of ego dissolution, where the usual sense of I falls away. Participants often describe these as deeply spiritual, reporting feelings of unity, transcendence, and insight. In therapeutic contexts, the intensity of this mystical-type experience often predicts lasting reductions in depression, anxiety, or addiction. Whether one calls these episodes glimpses of the soul, controlled hallucinations, or both, they demonstrate that the sense of self, often equated with the soul in everyday language, is not fixed. It is a dynamic construct that can be weakened, strengthened, or transformed. On a personal level, the mystery of the soul tends to show up not just in intellectual debates, but in moments of vulnerability. Sitting by the bed of a dying loved one, Watching the light fade from their eyes and the warmth leave their hand, the question, where did they go, cuts through theories and doctrines. Learning about the brain can offer comfort by explaining how personality and memory arise and why they can be altered by disease, drugs, or injury. Meditation and other contemplative practices can reveal that our usual sense of me is more fluid than we think, opening space for compassion and a quieter, less anxious way of being. Yet neither science nor spirituality erases the basic mystery that there is something it is like to be us at all, and that this inner life seems to matter profoundly. Bringing all these threads together, we can say that science has greatly narrowed the territory where an old-fashioned independent soul could hide. Personality, emotion, and thought track closely with brain states. When the brain is damaged, those aspects of who we are change. When brain activity stops, consciousness as we know it appears to end. At the same time, science has not yet fully explained why any brain state is accompanied by experience, nor why the universe contains beings who can ask these questions. Attempts to use quantum physics to bridge that gap are creative but remain speculative. Near-death experiences and reincarnation studies keep open a window of possibility, but do not close the case. Meditation, prayer, and psychedelic-assisted therapy show that spiritual practices are not mere superstition. They reliably alter brain networks and subjective life in ways that can be measured and often heal. So does the soul exist? If by soul we mean a scientifically verified immortal entity, the honest answer is that we do not have such verification. If by soul we mean the depth of conscious being, the felt reality of having an inner life, a sense of self, a capacity for love and wonder, then every moment of awareness is evidence that something profoundly real is happening. You do not have to choose between throwing away spiritual language and rejecting scientific knowledge. You can recognize that the brain is central to who you are, and still acknowledge that consciousness itself remains a frontier we do not fully understand. In that frontier, the ancient word soul can still serve as a meaningful name for the mystery at the heart of experience.